So we're starting the meditation formally now. And so the contemplation for this meditation is regarding laziness. Because laziness is the obstacle that we need to overcome for joyous perseverance. So when we're doing this meditation, we want to do some self-examination, but we want to do it in a way that doesn't beat ourselves up. We want to be open, curious, ready to discover how our mind works, how our body works, how we relate to laziness. But not be just using it as a stick or a judgment or a self-criticism, because actually that doesn't help us change. Noticing, being aware, being thoughtful about that, and then acting from that space is more productive. The teachings actually talk about 3 kinds of laziness. So I want you to think about these in relation to yourself and in relation to doing what is virtuous. Because that's what we mean by joyful effort, is delighting in doing what is virtuous and laziness getting in the way. So one form of laziness is procrastination, putting things off. I'll do it later. Yeah, that sounds important, but yeah, I haven't got time for it now. Maybe one day. So that kind of laziness. So just think about yourself. Think about doing your meditation, your practice, but also there's many other ways of bringing virtue into your daily life that we might procrastinate from. We probably all procrastinate some of the basic jobs that we have to do around the house, for example, but it's not necessarily virtuous. It depends on the mind we bring to it. So think about where procrastination fits in your life in terms of doing something virtuous. And then also consider the second kind of laziness, about really being rather focused on trivial things that are not really that important. They're time fillers. They might be relatively enjoyable to a certain extent, but they don't really bring long-term benefit. And they can be quite an obstacle in allowing us to find the time. So think about where trivia fits into your life. Or perhaps the more extreme form, something that's actually quite negative, something that takes you further away from pursuing a rich spiritual path. And we're thinking in terms of perhaps what you do on the cushion, but not entirely, because it's really how we integrate Dharma into our lives that's incredibly important. So trivia and negativity as obstacles is a form of laziness that prevents us engaging in virtue. And then the third type of laziness, which is feelings of inadequacy, discouragement, self-contempt even, feelings of hopelessness and inadequacy. This is the third type of laziness. It's not something we normally think of as a kind of laziness, but it actually is an obstacle. It gets in the way. And it stops us embarking on what is wholesome, what's going to actually lead us somewhere in the longer term. So in that way, it's a laziness, a kind of indulgence. But just remember not to be harsh on yourself. Try to be observant, noticing. If we think about our opportunity of having a human existence in conditions that mean that we can access Dharma, that we can receive the guidance we need, then this is an opportunity not to waste. And if we recognize that our life is short, this can help us focus. We don't know when death will come. And to have created the causes for even sitting here now, it's really quite a chain of events that is something to recognize and not waste. So this awareness of our laziness is a way of learning to create different habits. And overcoming the obstacles to diligence, effort, perseverance, all with joy.
Okay, so we're going to start with the first 3 verses of the text, and I'll read them out. I'll probably read them again, especially because there's 1 or 2 people who don't have the text. So as Sandra said in the introduction, this follows on from the chapter on patience. And at the beginning of each chapter, Shantideva, the first verse of each chapter usually refers back to the previous topic. So he says, having patience, I should develop enthusiasm. That's quite interesting, because patience is what holds you back from getting cross and frustrated and annoyed with yourself or others or circumstances, or even with the practice. So that's the function of patience, is to hold you back from that annoyance. But once you've held yourself back, then you need an energy for moving forward in a positive direction. And that is what's here called enthusiasm, or joyous effort. You'll find that we keep using different terms because different translations use different terms. The Sanskrit is virya. Virya is actually connected with virtue, etymologically. It's also connected with vir, which is a man. So it's also what it means to be a human in a way, is to have this kind of energy and enthusiasm, which is quite interesting. So it's virtue, vir, V-I-R, and so virya. But anyway, here it says enthusiasm. And then it says, for awakening will dwell only in those who exert themselves. So awakening is a synonym for enlightenment. It means to awaken from the sleep of ignorance, the darkness, the night of ignorance. We awaken to the brightness of the day of enlightenment. But we will only get there if we exert ourselves. It doesn't just come without effort. But then we're going to be looking at what kind of effort, because even the word effort has got connotations of stress and slogging and, everything being heavy going. But that's not what's meant here. And that's why the word joyous is so precious in some translations, joyous effort. Okay, then just as there is no movement without wind, so merit does not occur without enthusiasm. So wind is one of the 4 elements, and it's the one which makes things move. It's energy, basically. It's the energy of movement. And movement is what enables us to get from A to B. It's also something that can move our mind or move our heart or move our progression in life. Wind energy is also responsible for things like child development and or even things like the evolution of the universe. So wind has got many connotations. And here it's being compared with enthusiasm. And in the same way that wind creates movement, enthusiasm creates merit. So now we have to realize what the word merit signifies. And merit is, it's like what a battery has when it's charged. So the wind is like the electricity we put into it, and the charged battery has merit in the sense that it has an energy which is useful for whatever purpose you put it to. And in here, we're talking about the purpose of awakening. And in order to awaken, we need to have many realizations, such as we need to realize emptiness, the nature of reality. We need to realize bodhicitta. These are probably the two main ones. And both of them require merit. So merit has been translated as positive potential, and sometimes positive energy. It's what enables us to progress on the spiritual path. And we cannot generate merit without enthusiasm, because generating merit requires activity, positive, virtuous activity, either towards holy objects, such as the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, or towards sentient beings. So merit is created by being kind and generous and helpful towards others. But in order to do any of those things, we need to make an effort. And for that, we need enthusiasm, and preferably joyous enthusiasm. Okay, so then the next verse starts the question. What is enthusiasm? And the answer, it is finding joy in what is wholesome. So in the meditation, Shan used the word virtuous. And literally virtue in the Buddhist sort of explanation is that which brings happiness. So it's not about being a goody-goody or, being pious or some stuff like that. Virtue means creating the causes of happiness. Okay, and so that is what is wholesome in this line. What is enthusiasm? It is finding joy in what is wholesome. And in your self-introductions, many of you actually expressed that as your reason for being here. It was evident that that's why you're here, because you enjoy what is wholesome, such as studying this text and this topic and so forth. So we can compare that with many other joys, or so-called joys, that exist in this world, which lead to pleasures that are just temporary and completely fizzle out and don't build up any merit. In fact, they just burn up good karma, because once we've enjoyed that, we don't have that stock of good karma for something else. Merit is good karma. I should have mentioned that. Merit and good karma are pretty much synonymous. So what we're talking about here, which is joy in what is wholesome, is creating causes which actually keep developing. They develop a momentum. And that is one of the functions of bodhicitta, as described in the first chapter of this text, which is that, all other pleasures are like the plantain, are like a plant which doesn't grow again the next year. I can't remember what they're called, but they just bloom once. Whereas with bodhicitta, it's like a perennial which keeps coming back, and it keeps growing. The plant or tree keeps growing. So finding joy in what is wholesome. Its opposing factors, that's the factors which oppose enthusiasm or joyous effort, are explained as laziness, attraction to what is harmful, and despising oneself out of despondency. So these are the three lazinesses that we just meditated on. Here, attraction to what is harmful. In the meditation, we were referring to that as trivia, or even being drawn to the negative. And sometimes it's said that it even means making yourself very busy with things which actually you didn't really have to do. So some of us are kind of obsessed with being busy in order to keep ourselves afloat. We feel as if when we're busy, then at least I've got a purpose in my life. But unless that activity is wholesome in the sense of virtuous, that it's actually going to lead to lasting happiness, then actually it's kind of burning up energy. And it's even described here as laziness, although it doesn't look like laziness. Nobody in the world would ever call that laziness. They'd say, oh, that person's really hardworking. But what are they hardworking at? And for this, I think it's useful to think about the term success, because there's worldly success and there's spiritual success, and these two are very different. And there's also the term perfection. Some people are perfectionists in a worldly sense. They just want to kind of really work hard to make everything look completely perfect, but it's totally fragile. Whereas in the Dharma, when we talk about perfection, we're talking about something which is lasting because it's rooted in reality, the nature of reality, the ultimate reality of phenomena. And that's called a perfection. And perfection which we practice will lead to the perfect state, which is enlightenment. And enlightenment is something which we can't fall back from. We still can function in the world. The Buddha can still walk around and talk to people and, kind of benefit people practically. But from the enlightened perspective, then there's no impediment and in any way. So therefore, the help is extremely kind of far-reaching. So the despising oneself out of despondency, that was covered in the meditation. This feeling of inadequacy, which many people in the Buddhist community seem to express, I would never become enlightened because, I'm such a bad person, sort of thing. But this is really founded in something which is nothing to do with Dharma. It's some kind of guilt which is inherited from another culture, sort of feeling bad about yourself. No. There's no reason to feel bad about yourself in the Dharma. Even though you've made many mistakes, you have much suffering, and you still have causes of suffering. Feeling bad about yourself doesn't help. Doing something about it helps. And in other words, transforming yourself. So then the next verse, because of attachment to the pleasurable taste of idleness. Okay, so this is really blobbing out. You will find later that there is sometimes when we do need to relax. So it's not against relaxing, but it's about wasting time in this kind of semi-sedation of just lounging around too much. Anybody who's had teenagers or remember their own teenagers will know what I'm talking about. Because of craving for sleep, well, that kind of goes with it, doesn't it? The pleasurable taste of idleness, because of craving for sleep, and because of having no disillusion with the misery of psychic existence. So there is a lot in our tradition about reflecting on suffering. And, we only have to look at our own suffering, physical, emotional, mental, and then we just need to look at people around us. And so there's no really huge excuse for having no disillusion with the misery of psychic existence, but somehow we're very conditioned to barricade ourselves in with this semblance of lots of pleasures and things which are, kind of attractive. And basically that's samsara. And it's the suffering of change because it's fragile. It won't last. It's doomed, actually. It will only create much bigger suffering because when it falls apart, we'll think that our whole world's destroyed. Whereas if we'd accepted the reality of suffering in the first place, we wouldn't have those expectations. So laziness grows very strong. And so, if we look at society in general, or maybe look at ourselves in the past, or maybe to some extent in the present, we will see that laziness is very much part of the culture in the general, much more sort of wide sense that we're talking about here. I just want to look at one more verse and then we'll break into discussions. Verse 14. Relying upon the boat of a human body. This is one of my very favorite verses. When I first read this text, this was the first text that I ever went to a course on. This verse struck me so hard that I wrote it out and I stuck it on the wall by my bed. So I'll read it out first, then I'll comment on it. Relying upon the boat of a human body, free yourself from the great river of pain. As it is hard to find this boat again. This is no time for sleep, you fool. So I was quite young, so still addicted to sleep. Actually, probably still am, to be honest, if I got the chance, but somehow I don't. Anyway, free yourself from the great river of pain. It just flows and flows and gets bigger and bigger. And that's happening in our world in general right now. It seems like suffering is rising in so many ways. We're talking about different types of suffering. Of course, there's physical suffering, much of what is caused by the environment and environmental crisis. But also there's the mental and emotional suffering from so many different things that are happening in the world. People being separated from loved ones and all kinds of tragedies that are befalling people. So the great river of pain is flowing with a strong current at the moment in our world. And the human body is like a boat on this river. It's actually a special boat compared to the other bodies that are on this river, such as animal bodies, because in a human body, we can study and practice Dharma. It's not that animals don't have incredible intelligence, they do. It's not that they don't have feelings, they do. It's not that they can't communicate with each other and so forth, they do. They have culture, but they do not have Dharma and the possibility of practicing it in their culture the way that we do. There are probably various reasons for that, to do with the different types of intelligence. So the boat on this river is a human body, and what it means is that it's possible with this boat for us to navigate the river. Actually, there's often reference to crossing to the far shore. So it might be about actually crossing from one side of the river to another, because the far shore is enlightenment. And crossing to the far shore is one of the ways of translating the word paramita. And paramita is the Sanskrit for perfection. And in the Bodhisattva path, there are 6 perfections. And what we're studying today is the 4th of those. Enthusiasm or joyous effort is the 4th perfection. It only becomes a perfection when it's conjoined with the understanding of emptiness. The other thing about enthusiasm in relation to the perfections is this. Enthusiasm relates to all the other perfections in the sense that they all need enthusiasm for us to progress. The others are generosity, ethics, patience, and then concentration and wisdom. And they all need enthusiasm. So this is a kind of, like, in some ways it's the root perfection, or it's the one that underpins all the others. So then he says, as it is hard to find this boat again, this is no time for sleep, you fool. And this is what we meditated on, that death is certain, that this human form and particular situation we have of having met the Dharma and being able to practice it, this is hard to find again. It's extremely scarce in the whole of existence. Most beings do not have that. They might even have a human body, but they don't have the Dharma. And so while we have it, let's waste a precious moment. Let's transform every moment of our day and night into Dharma. That's what I take from this verse. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to break you into pairs, and you're going to have 5 minutes. Oh.
Yeah, we've changed. So we either have a break or we have a discussion and then have a break.
Yeah, sorry. I've run over.
No, we all ran over.
We all ran over. Maybe we started a wee bit late, and then the introductions were so interesting. We're supposed to have a break. Well, we planned to have a break at 11:30, but actually, I'd really like us to have the pairs discussion now, and then we'll have a half-hour break, and we'll find a way to catch up. Sorry about that. If that's okay with all of you, but you haven't got a big chance to say no right now. Okay, the question that you're going to discuss in the pair, which I'll also write in a broadcast to each pair, but I'll say it now. How much of a problem is laziness in my Dharma study and practice? How much of a problem is laziness in my Dharma study and practice? And I'm gonna just cut back a wee bit on the time. I'll give you 4 minutes each. So one of you starts speaking, and you have 4 minutes to talk, and then I'll give you a warning to switch over, and the other person starts speaking, and they have 4 minutes. Okay, and the question again, how much of a problem is laziness in my Dharma study and practice? Okay. Okay, so there's 3 groups of 2 and 1 group of 3. Okay, in the group of 3, you'll have to have 3 minutes each and do your own timing. Okay, good luck. Have a good discussion. Where I get a bit lost. I think I can do it. Yep, there we go.
So find your posture. Breathe into it. Relax the tension. Could everybody just check that their mic is muted? I think somebody's mic is still not muted. So just before you become absorbed in the meditation, just double check that your mic is muted.
Oh, I can do it.
And in this meditation, we're going to focus on one of the methods of developing bodhicitta, equalizing and exchanging self with other. And we start by equalizing. If we've been doing full meditation, we would have started with the other practices of bodhicitta, seeing all beings as the same in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. And in this part of the meditation, we're particularly focusing on ensuring that we don't put ourselves above and beyond everybody else. And this is also not forgetting ourselves either. It's equally not putting ourselves lower and less deserving either, but equalizing. In most of our day-to-day life, we go about it as we are the most important people. So it's switching this attitude and recognizing that we're one of many. And although it's ourselves that we take from A to B, and it's our mind that we're working on, we're not inflating that to being more important. My body, my possessions, my family. This is how we tend to operate. And this equalizing is a counterforce to that. It's counteracting this inflation. We're all equally entitled to happiness and to avoid suffering. In this, we're exactly the same as all other beings. So then we think about what are the disadvantages of self-cherishing? This is what comes to mind for you when I say that. What are the disadvantages of self-cherishing? It might be counterintuitive because much of the messages we get growing up are about you need to look after yourself, you need to do this, it's down to you. And of course, that's not untrue, but it's put on a pedestal in a way that isn't realistic and won't actually bring us the goal we want of this happiness that doesn't fall back into suffering for ourselves and for others. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, has said something like, if you're going to be selfish, be big selfish. And by this he meant big selfish, cherishing others. Because actually, self-cherishing is what leads to suffering for ourselves and others. It's a very strong self-centeredness. It doesn't lead to our goals, and in fact leads us to actually create negative karma, to do actions that result in suffering. If you think about all the problems in the world, you can see that this self-centered, self-cherishing attitude lies beneath them. And yet it's not the way we normally think. So just contemplate that for a moment, that all my individual problems and all those of the world have this at their basis: self-cherishing or self-centeredness. Sometimes it's something we can spot within a particular leader or world leader or particular action. Think about it for yourself, of how does self-cherishing hinder me? Just on the micro level, it makes us tight, fearful, anxious, threatened, irritable. If we get something that way, the feeling of whatever it is, the benefit of that is very short term. You just want more. It can make us feel guilty, self-pity. Just check what an unproductive state of mind self-cherishing is. And how it doesn't lead us to what we most want. And how this is the same for others. And then think about how the opposite kind of mind, a mind that cherishes others, how does this lead to us feeling in our lives? Notice the difference between when you've done something that is tight and self-centered and self-focused versus something that is giving without expectation or control. Just doing it because it feels the right thing to do. As skillfully as possible, of course. Just be aware of how expansive that mind is of cherishing others, and how it also fulfills our goals at the same time. But we feel calmer, more at ease, more comfortable in our skin. And when we read about some of the actions of others who go above and beyond to take care of others in the most desperate of circumstances, how inspiring, how uplifting, how extraordinary. In this way, we create all the conditions for our own future positive rebirths, but also that we are reaching out. We're stepping towards this goal that we started with of leading all beings from suffering. And we're not choosing between some who are deserving and some who are not. Completely non-partisan, completely open, willing. Everyone has this seed for cherishing others. This is our Buddha nature. All that we benefit from comes from others. So if we recognize this, it's natural to wish to give back to them. All the benefits we ourselves receive, right up to enlightenment, come from others. They directly and indirectly give us the opportunity to practice in a way that will lead to our own enlightenment for their benefit. So this is the basis on which we do the meditation of exchanging ourselves with others. With compassion and love, we take on all the suffering of others. We visualize it as dark smoke coming from them, representing all their suffering, coming into this knot of self-cherishing in our heart, where it transforms that knot into light, sending back all that they need. And we do this to the ability we're able. If we've not done this before, it may seem difficult. You may feel not ready, and that's okay. But we can aspire to be able to actually do this in future and indirectly benefit because our own self-cherishing is weakened and eventually eliminated. And then there's no holding back. So we will do this on our breath for a few minutes. And when we breathe in, we can imagine taking in the suffering to our self-cherishing, where it simply transforms it. That knot is loosened into an open heart that is expansive and loving and giving. And from there flows out light, which represents whatever anyone needs. We let go of our own attachment to our body, our possessions, and even our attachment to our virtues, and send these out in the form that's needed by each and every sentient being. But we can start with even just taking our own future suffering in this way. Our suffering of tomorrow, or our suffering of next week, or our suffering at the time of death, or our suffering of going into the next life. And start from there and expand out. And when you have more time, you can be more thoughtful and take on specific things that are happening in the world to people or to people you know. We each do it to our capacity at the time, without judgment, but allowing it to naturally become more expansive as this self-cherishing knot at our heart loosens and finally is transformed. So spend a few moments together breathing in this way, in with the dark smoke of suffering or future suffering, the suffering of others that you know, the suffering of others in the world. Be thoughtful about what that is. Coming into your self-cherishing knot at the heart center. Loosening and transforming and sending back radiant, blissful, light energy. Alleviating the suffering of your future self and of others. And feel that all sentient beings surrounding you are now free from suffering. And likewise, your own self-cherishing that has led to your own suffering is now removed. And then rejoicing the ability to bring this about.
So this practice, which we've just done, is extremely important. It's the core practice of this text. And it's introduced in verse 16 of this chapter, even though it's mainly discussed in the following chapter. But verse 16 says, without indulging in despondency, for which we could sort of perhaps say disillusion or depression. Despondency is okay. I should gather the supports for enthusiasm. So the supports for enthusiasm is what we're going to be looking at this afternoon mainly. And we need to gather them so that we can sustain the enthusiasm and earnestly take control of myself. So that is really fundamental to all Dharma teaching and practice, is to take control of oneself, to take responsibility for what one thinks, says, and does with one's body through self-control. And then the next two lines, then by seeing the equality between self and others, I should practice exchanging self for others. So these are two different practices. They're usually called equalizing self and others, and then exchanging self for others, or exchanging self and others. And it was really explained very clearly in the meditation. So I don't feel that I need to go into it again, but you do need to recognize that the practice of exchanging, which can be done with the breath, but it can also be done just through general consideration in real life situations or during meditation. But it must be based on this practice of equalizing self and others, of which usually the main practice there is to recognize that everybody equally wants happiness and doesn't want suffering. And what's really interesting is that that is automatically a function of having a mind. If you have a mind, you naturally want happiness and do not want suffering. And this even applies for a fully enlightened mind. Because for a Buddha, wanting happiness means wanting happiness for all sentient beings and not wanting their suffering. And this is also synonymous with what we call Buddha nature. So the equalizing really comes down to the fact that all beings have the same essence of mind, which is its empty nature, which is something that we'll look at when we come to the 9th chapter. So just to keep going with the text, I don't want to slip behind time too much again. Verse 19, it will be so if I do not forsake the Bodhisattva's way of life. So that's the danger, is that you get inspired by this path and then you forsake it. You have a lapse. You get engaged in something where, you get channeled into a sort of selfish pursuit. Why should someone like myself, who has been born in the human race, not attain awakening, since I am able to recognize what is beneficial and what is of harm? So this actually counteracts the laziness of feeling inadequate. You need to recognize that because you are capable of recognizing what brings happiness and what leads to suffering, when you are given the clear teachings by the Buddha, then you are able to attain awakening, because that's the ultimate happiness. That's where all Dharma leads to. And then in verse 23, even doctors eliminate illness with unpleasant medical treatments. So in order to overcome manifold sufferings, I should be able to put up with some discomfort. And this counteracts the laziness of feeling discouraged by the challenge of the path, the challenge of the practice, of just not wanting to get up in the morning in order to do your practice, or just not wanting to make the effort to attend a teaching or study the Dharma in another way. Because actually it is quite hard work. It does require effort. But when you think about the fact that you'd be quite willing to go through even quite painful procedures in order to put your health right, well, that's just temporary, because this body is going to come to an end before long. But these practices for the mind will persist from life to life in terms of the benefits. And then if we go to verse 25, at the beginning, the guide of the world encourages the giving of such things as food. Later, when accustomed to this, one may progressively start to give away even one's flesh. So in the perfection of generosity, there is the practice of giving away one's body. It's exemplified by when the Buddha was a Bodhisattva in a previous life. It's said that he gave his body to the hungry tigress so that she would have the physical capacity to feed her cubs. But there are many stories from previous lives of the Buddha, actually, where he gave his life. And for us, mostly that's kind of like very far-fetched. So this is an example of the feeling of inadequacy, because we think, oh, I'd never be able to do that. So what this verse is saying is, don't think that. Make a start by doing something small, which is in that direction. It's like saying every journey begins with a single step. And in the case of generosity, giving food, well, many of us give crumbs to the birds. So if you start to give crumbs to the birds with the sense that eventually, may I even be able to give my body, should the need arise. There was somebody in the Zeebrugge ferry disaster 2 or 3 decades ago who allowed their body to be used as a bridge so that other passengers could escape, and they themselves drowned. So this is probably a so-called ordinary person giving their life for others. It does happen. And then the verse 26, at such a time when my mind is developed to the point of regarding my body like food, then what hardship would there be when it came to giving away my flesh? So in terms of exchanging self with others, we're willing to eat the bodies of others when we meet, or even when we eat animal products, we're willing to take certain things from others. So in a sense, once we transcend the problem of the inequality of self and others, and become, well, even turn it around so that giving to others becomes the most important activity, then seeing our body as food has a logic, because our body is something temporary. Many animals give their body as food, not willingly, of course. They're killed. But we wouldn't dream of seeing our own body as food, mostly. But potentially it is. So these are things to work on in meditation, and definitely just to point out is the Buddha says don't try these practices until you're ready. So, yeah, okay. And then 28, as their bodies are happy due to their merits, and their minds are happy due to their wisdom, even if they remained in cyclic existence for the sake of others, why would the compassionate ones ever be upset? Now, this is what the Bodhisattva is required to do, is to willingly be reborn in cyclic existence where there is difficulty, hardship, suffering, but to be willing to be reborn there for the sake of others. And this is something we can work on now. We can work on now in preparation for our next life, is to develop the motivation. May I come back, even if it's problematic like it has been this time, or even more problematic because the world situation is even worse. But may I come back and help in whatever way is possible in the circumstances. That's kind of the general wish. And that's challenging because most of us have an instinct to kind of run away to a desert island and live where it's kind of safe and happy, when we see how bad things are getting around where we are. Like some people thought, oh, Brexit's the end of the world, shall I move to Europe? Okay, yeah, and dump everybody here? Do you know what I mean? That's really that's just a little example, but in general, no, we need to develop the attitude that says, yes, I willingly go into situations of suffering, which some people do in their work. There was somebody in the introduction who talked about that. That is Bodhisattva activity, is willingly going into a situation of suffering for the sake of others. And then the verse 29, due to the strength of the awakening mind. Awakening mind is a translation of the word bodhicitta, which is the aspiration to become awakened or enlightened for the sake of others. Due to the strength of the awakening mind, the bodhisattvas consume their previous transgressions. In other words, they have negativities on their mind stream because of previous bad karma, but because of the strength of their bodhicitta, this kind of gets dissolved or purified, we say, through the bodhicitta, and harvests oceans of merit. So not only do they purify their mind, but they create this merit or positive potential, remember the battery that's been fully charged, so that they can go to enlightenment. Hence they are said to excel the Shravakas. Now Shravakas is the Sanskrit for hearers or listeners, which it refers to a type of Buddhist practitioner who basically they want to become liberated from suffering for themselves. And they do not take on the responsibility of benefiting all beings. They do have love and compassion. They are a positive being. They are in the Dharma, but the Bodhisattvas excel them because the Bodhisattvas work for all beings. Okay, so I'm going to pause there and take you into breakout groups. And the topic for you to discuss is not a question, it's just a topic, and it is this: universal responsibility during challenging times. And I haven't mentioned that term before. I meant to, but I sort of missed it. Universal responsibility is the attitude of working for the sake of all beings, of being open to whoever comes that has need, of not discriminating, I'll help this one and not that one, of being willing to help whoever one can. That is what universal responsibility means. But during challenging times, such as we're in now, with the COVID pandemic and the climate crisis and other problems in the world, ecological collapse and so forth, then it becomes more challenging in some ways. But We could also argue that universal responsibility is even more necessary. So that's your topic for discussion. And I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and you'll be in pairs because we've got 10 people now, and you'll have 5 minutes each way. I'll give you a warning in 5 minutes to swap over. So one person talk. I mean, it may be that you end up with a discussion, but give each person a chance at least to say their bit, what you feel about this topic, and I'll put it in the broadcast, universal responsibility during challenging times. Okay, have a good discussion.
So we're going to start with a meditation. We start by preparing our body first and then our mind. And bring our motivation from the beginning of the day. So in this session and the next, we're going to look at the 4 powers and how they apply to us. And these are the 4 powers that help us achieve the perfection of joyous effort or perseverance. So the first of these powers is called aspiration. And this is based on the knowledge and awareness of how karma creates. We can create positive results or negative results. And based on faith and conviction, we develop a yearning to do this in order to create the results that are favourable, that are going to have a positive outcome for others as well as ourselves. And particularly developing this yearning, this really deep, 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 deep wish to do this strong intention, aspiration of the importance, because beings suffer and it's needless. There's a way out. So we develop this longing, this yearning, this really strong feeling, intention to not waste even a minute. In fact, to use every opportunity in our daily lives towards this goal of leading beings away from suffering. And perfecting our own joyous effort to do this. So spend a few minutes just really trying to absorb this feeling into your heart. Connect with it. This is the root of all the virtue that we can create. Positive merit, positive karma. This aspiration is at the root. This aspiration is at the root of abandoning cyclic existence for the purpose of benefiting others. And it's not just thinking about it, it's setting out to make every opportunity come from our circumstances to lead in this direction. And then we have the second power, which is steadfastness. So in order to overcome every obstacle, we need to have a strong intention and then a strong carrying through, a confidence, in fact, that we can see things through. And the text tells us, Shantideva says, actually, if we can't complete a certain action at a certain time, if we're not ready yet to do that, then it's better to pause rather than being stop-start, because this creates imprints of giving up. And what we want is what the Dalai Lama talks about in those lines that we often see on posters, never give up. We need that kind of steadfastness and inner confidence. It's directly opposite to this laziness of discouragement and self-contempt. It's setting ourselves up to succeed, to not be overcome by anything, but to keep going. Rooted in this aspiration for virtue. Based on the recognition of all sentient beings that are caught in samsara need a way out. And it's our responsibility. So again, connect your mind with steadfastness. But also being realistic, not taking on too much too soon. Taking on what you know with effort that you can fulfill. It's like when we first learnt to meditate, I'm sure you'll remember you were told not to do too long a sessions at first, because you want to come back next time with enthusiasm, not feeling discouraged. So it's about pacing and determination and confidence.
So I just want to say something for those who are studying the whole text, which came up in a talk that was given as part of the Dalai Lama Global Summit, which was organized by the Lion's Roar newspaper and Robert Thurman a couple of weeks back. And one of the talks was by Professor Jan Willis, who will be known to some of you because she gave some talks for the UK PMT recently. And she talked about the Bodhicharyavatara, this text. And she reminded me that in his commentary, His Holiness Dalai Lama correlates this text with the prayer that we say, Bodhicitta is precious, may it be born where it has not been born, where it has been born, may it not diminish, and where it has not diminished, may it grow and flourish. And what His Holiness points out, and Jan Willis emphasized, is that this text, the first 3 chapters, are about may it be born where it has not been born. The first chapter is on the benefits of bodhicitta. The second one, disclosure of evil, which is kind of confession and beginning the purification practice in preparation for the third chapter, which is taking the bodhisattva vows. And you take the bodhisattva vows at the point where you develop uncontrived bodhicitta. At least theoretically, that's what it corresponds with. So that is bodhicitta being born where it has not been born. There are then 3 chapters, chapters 4, 5, and 6, which deal with mindfulness and conscientiousness and patience. And those are all about the next line of the prayer, or correspond to the next line of the prayer, which is where it has been mourn, may it not diminish. So those 3 practices are all about safeguarding our bodhicitta from being diminished or even destroyed in the case of anger, which is very destructive. Then the final triptych of chapters is 7, 8, and 9, which we've just started with chapter 7, and that corresponds to the line where it has not diminished, may it grow and flourish. So the section that we're in now with chapter 7 is already starting to talk about the flourishing of our bodhicitta, which means that we really progress along the path to enlightenment. So I think that that's quite helpful. There is a chapter 10, which is about dedication, and that kind of corresponds to the whole prayer in a way, because it covers everything. So we're getting into the flourishing part of the Bodhicharyavatara. Now, to go back to the text now, particularly to look at these powers of aspiration and steadfastness, let's just turn to verse 31, where it says, the supports when working for the sake of living beings are aspiration, steadfastness, joy, and rest. So those are the 4 powers that we're looking at this afternoon. And we're doing 2 in this session, and then we'll do 2 in the next section. So then it goes on to say, aspiration is developed through fear of misery. So misery is another word for suffering. So if you think about the fear of suffering, I don't know that fear is quite the right word. Basically, we just don't like suffering. And if we can do anything to avoid it, we will. So that's what it means, fear of misery. And of course, it can mean about the misery of being born in the lower realms, which is we do have the potentials for on our mind stream to go there in the next life if the wrong potentials ripen. But in general, it's just that we don't like suffering as part of our life, whatever realm we're in. And so aspiration for enlightenment, or, we also talk about renunciation, is about transcending that. And bodhicitta is much more powerful than simple renunciation for one's own sake in terms of expediting our leaving suffering behind, because it creates much more merit and is much more powerful in purifying our negativities. So it says aspiration is developed through fear of misery and by contemplating the benefit of aspiration itself. So aspiration's in brackets there, so that's not in the original text. So it could be, and by contemplating the benefits themselves. And the benefits, of course, are the benefits for ourselves and sentient beings from generating bodhicitta. And once we know the benefits of something, then we start to aspire for that something. This happens in worldly life just the same. If you think that there's some benefit in getting the next model of the iPhone, then you start saving up for it because you aspire for it. And so, it's like that throughout all experience. It probably happens in the animal kingdom too. But certainly in terms of the path, we always look at the benefits of having something and the disadvantages of not having it in order to generate the aspiration to gain it. And that is a common sort of theme throughout the Lam Rim. Then 32 says, thus, in order to increase my enthusiasm, I should strive to abandon its opposing forces. Well, we've already looked at what those are, the 3 kinds of laziness. To amass the supports of aspiration, self-confidence, joy, and rest. So while we abandon the opposing things by seeing their disadvantages, we amass the supports of, in other words, we accumulate or collect the supports, which are also called powers, actually. I think calling them powers is quite useful. Aspiration, self-confidence, joy, and rest. So self-confidence here is actually a synonym for steadfastness. And I think that came out in the meditation, that of connecting steadfastness with self-confidence. And if there's time, I'll talk a bit about that as well, but we'll see how we get on with the verses. And then to practice in earnest and to become strong in self-control. So self-control has come back as an important theme. And if you think about it, whenever you stray from the path, it's because you've lost self-control. You've been taken over by an afflictive emotion or a distraction. You might think that it's to do with, oh, well, this thing over here, like my ill parent has taken me out of the path. Not at all. You can care for your ill parent as a practice of the path. Or some people think, oh, I'm having a baby, I can't do any practice. Well, actually, no, having a baby is practice. It's an incredible practice of generosity and love and so forth. So anything in our life can be practice. The main point is, do we orient ourselves to it in that way? So it's not that we have to say, oh, I'm being distracted because such and such is so important. The reason why we're being distracted is because we aren't able to integrate that such and such with the path. And that's something that we need to train ourselves to do. And of course, that doesn't come automatically. That's something that takes time. In fact, it can take years and years in order to integrate everything in our life to the path. But it's certainly possible. And then, of course, the whole of one's life becomes what you can call sacred and, a spiritual path. I think Geshe Thupten Jinpa calls it the re-spiritualization of daily life, or something. I've come across this phrase. It's very nice. And it's actually transforming your ordinary life into the path, rather than thinking you've got to go somewhere else on a mountaintop or a monastery or a nunnery or something. Okay, keep going with the verses. I'd like to go to verse 40. The Mighty One, that is the Buddha, himself has said that aspiration is the root of every facet of virtue. So that came up in the meditation. That's really important to think about. Unless you aspire for something, you'll never bother to do it, will you? Its root is constant acquaintance with the ripening effects of actions. So again, this came up in the meditation. The thing about acquaintance with the ripening effects of actions is that until we become enlightened, we don't specifically know what are the ripening effects of particular actions, and we have to rely on the Buddha's word. Before we become a Buddha, when we become a sort of advanced Bodhisattva, we do get a general understanding that good actions lead to happy results and bad actions lead to negative results. And even at our stage, we can think, well, that's kind of common sense, isn't it? Because it happens, in the short term as well as in the long term. But in general, we do need to trust the Buddha's teaching, in which case we have to have faith in the Buddha. And having faith in the Buddha goes very, very well with the thought, I can become enlightened. Because if you don't have faith in someone who's already become enlightened, why should you think that you can become enlightened? So refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha and bodhicitta go so well together. Because if there's a Buddha who was previously a sentient being, and if I'm a sentient being, that means I can become a Buddha. Okay? And then that means that if I read something the Buddha taught and think about it, then I can trust it. I can use it. It can help me. Sometimes I have to make sure I understand it properly, because it can be a bit confusing sometimes if you don't understand. But these teachings on karma gradually become more and more a sort of guide for the way we live. And that's also kind of evident because we find that it helps us. It actually helps make us happier. And that's a good sign that there must be something in it. Because if it just made us miserable, or, you know, just apathetic or something, there probably might be a problem. So it's something to work at, definitely. So if we now move on to verse 47, there are 3 verses there which we'll look at. Let's just check the time. Yeah, no. Wait. We're doing very well for time.
Yeah, we are.
I think we had a short meditation, even. Okay, all right. Oh, well.
3 minutes short.
Not to worry. Okay. Well, anyway, I don't need to use up all the time, but we'll okay, fine. So, verse 47. First of all, I should examine well what is to be done. So now we're moving on to the path of the power of steadfastness. Examine well what is to be done. So sometimes they recommend us that we should do quite a lot of study before we really commit ourselves. Somehow we do start to get on with the practice and the path before we've done much study, because we're the kind of people who like to have a taste of meditation and some kind of evidence that it works. And that's fine. But actually, to really engage in the path with confidence, you need to know it. You need to understand it. You need to see the whole structure and see how different practices fit within it. And examining well what is to be done is really good. I mean, in the FPMT, we have this program called Discovering Buddhism. And I think it's the third module of that is called Presenting the Path. And in that module, you look at the whole path in brief. You just you get a sense of the whole structure of the path. And that's the kind of thing that we need in order to feel at least the beginning of confidence that this path is going to be worth practicing, because it's actually going to bring results. Because if we don't have that confidence, then we're likely to lose our way at some point when obstacles come. So I should examine well what is to be done to see whether I can pursue it or cannot undertake it. So we need to analyze. And this is something actually which is taught that we should apply in every aspect of our life. So as I mentioned this morning when Jude asked a question about the sort of risks of changing activity. And, it is something that we need to consider. If we undertake a project to complete something, we should try to complete it. For example, sometimes we do a retreat and we decide that we're going to do a certain number of mantras, for instance, or prostrations or something. Well, if we decide before we start that we're going to do that, then it's really helpful at the end of each day to pray, may I complete my retreat? Because all kinds of obstacles can come up which pull us out of it. And then we have to start again another time. That's just an example from the Dharma, but it applies in everyday life too. In fact, it applies at work when you think about it. So in other words, don't undertake something if you don't think you'll be able to complete it. So you have to be able to say no. And that's something which some of us find difficult. Anyway, if I'm unable, it is best to leave it. But once I've started, I must not withdraw. So in terms of changing your activity, if it's something where you committed that you were going to complete something, it would be best to complete it and then say, thanks very much, I'm going to move on. So Sheila was mentioning Dominic Cummings this morning. So he said, I'm going to be leaving Downing Street by the end of December. But as it turned out, he wasn't even able to complete that because his boss kicked him out yesterday. So, I mean, maybe that's not his fault. I don't know. But anyway, that's sort of a jokey example. But you have to think about these things in life. There are many things where you start to build self-confidence, where you find yourself completing something you set out to do. And then you lose self-confidence if you keep starting things and not finishing them. And we either know that about ourselves or we know other people who are like that. And we can see that it's actually quite frustrating for themselves, but also for those around them, because then it's hard for people to trust you that you're as good as your word. So there's many good reasons. If I do what? Anyway, then this habit will continue in other lives. Oh, I see. If I build the habit of completing what I commit to, it will continue in other lives. And wrongdoing and misery will increase. Oh, that must be referring to if I do something negative. Oh dear, I'm a bit lost here.
If I withdraw.
Oh, if I withdraw. Thank you. Thank you. I couldn't see your face because I've got the gallery view switched off. But thank you. Yes, if I do withdraw, then this habit of withdrawing will continue in future lives. Exactly. And wrongdoing and misery will increase because we will never complete any positive practice. We will never complete any Dharma practice. We will not gain any realizations. And so that means that we will actually lose our way with the Dharma path. Also, other actions done at the time of its fruition will be weak. So if we've got this habit of withdrawing, it means that even when we do bring something to a fruition, then those actions will not be accomplished because they'll be too weak. So yeah, I mean, we do know people who've lost their way, and sometimes we ourselves lose our way, and we know what it feels like. It's really horrible. It's actually, it's also similar to depression, if you think about it. When you feel very depressed, you just feel you can't do anything. And this connects actually to the feeling of complete loss of self-confidence. Okay, self-confidence should be applied to wholesome actions, the overcoming of disturbing conceptions, and my ability to do this. So there's three things. When we engage in wholesome actions, practicing virtue, we should do it with self-confidence. We shouldn't have lots of doubts and think, oh, maybe I'm doing the wrong thing. We should know that it's positive and do it. The overcoming of disturbing conceptions. So this is quite difficult if we're prone to anger or attachment, desire, jealousy or pride, all these kind of things. It needs a lot of self-confidence to overcome them. We have to keep telling ourselves over and over and over. Otherwise, we won't achieve the goal of overcoming them. And then we need to apply self-confidence to my ability to do it, which means to feel this sense of can-do, that the capacity to achieve these goals lies within us. We do have that capacity. It's completely understandable that people lack that self-confidence, especially when we come from a culture where we're often put down when we're young, or even when we're older. We can be put down by somebody who is close to us, who's always criticizing us and making us feel that we're inadequate. And so we sometimes have to really separate ourselves from those kind of influences and find that space within ourselves where we discover our self-worth and build that determination. Okay. And then we'll just look at 55, 56, and 59. So 55, this is a very strong statement. I will conquer everything, and nothing at all shall conquer me. Wow. I, a child of the lion-like conqueror, should remain self-confident in this way. So this is something that the lion-like conqueror had, which is called the four fearlessnesses. It's actually something we're about to study in our basic program next Tuesday. So it's something I've been looking at in preparation for next Tuesday. The Buddha had the fearlessness to say, I am enlightened. I have conquered the disturbing conceptions. I know what leads to happiness and what does not lead to what leads to suffering. So he had that confidence. And I am a child of that Buddha in the sense that I am committed to the Bodhisattva path. I am generating bodhicitta, and therefore I should also have that confidence that I will conquer everything and nothing at all shall conquer me. So this is the braveness of the Bodhisattva, sometimes called like the warrior, or, you know, it's a kind of a very strong feeling that we can all develop. And it's very important. Whoever has self-importance is destroyed by it. So we're not talking about that sort of self-confidence. Self-importance is definitely a poison. Is destroyed by it, is disturbed, and has no self-confidence. And we can certainly see that in some of the political leaders who preen themselves and look so strong, but actually inside they are quite timid little children in some ways. And but we can see it even in ourselves at times, that we put on a mask of self-confidence. That's not what is being talked about here. For those with self-confidence do not succumb to the power of the enemy, whereas the former are under the sway of the enemy of self-importance. Incredible verse, isn't it? Incredible verse. You can see it in yourself, but you can see it in others too. That they're under the sway of the enemy of self-importance. In other words, self-importance is the enemy, and those kind of people will succumb to the enemy of the afflictions. They will harm others. They will be self-centered and just indulge in their attachments. It's narcissism, actually, in a way, by another name. Okay, and then finally, verse 59, before we move into the breakout groups. Whoever seizes self-confidence in order to conquer the enemy of self-importance, they are the self-confident ones, the victorious heroes. Wonderful. So you can use the word pride to talk about something positive, like a lion, you know, has the pride of being the king of the jungle and all that stuff. So here we're talking about the pride of the Bodhisattva overcomes the ordinary pride of self-importance. In addition, whoever definitely conquers the spread of this enemy, self-importance, completely wins the fruit of a conqueror. In other words, you will quickly become enlightened, fulfilling the wishes of the world, which is the purpose of becoming enlightened. And I think that if you overcome the enemy of self-importance, then you have a genuine humility. And humility doesn't mean crawling around on the floor being a doormat all the time, but it does mean having the attitude that your raison d'etre is to serve others. It's not to self-serve. And I think that is the key thing. It doesn't mean that you don't act with self-confidence, strongly, you know, resisting negative things that you're drawn towards and so forth. You do that. Okay, time for discussion. And the discussion question or issue topic is my capacity for the powers of aspiration and steadfastness. So it's looking at yourself personally in terms of these powers and you know, sharing with your partner how that's going, or you know, how you're doing. And don't be afraid to say if you feel you're doing quite well. That's fine. It doesn't have to be showing off. It's something we have to be careful of in Buddhism. We shouldn't show off, but at the same time, I don't think we should just kind of be all self-effacing the whole time either. I think, you know, especially if you're talking to somebody that you trust, you should be willing to be open. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is pause the recording.
So again, settle your energy, find your posture. And approach this session with a sense of joy. That's the power we're going to be focusing on, but it's a reminder that actually we can approach everything in that way. So these are the two powers we're going to focus on in this meditation: joy and rest. So the intense yearning that we experience through the power of aspiration to achieve our goal for the benefit of others, and carried forth with steadfastness. We develop a perseverance that is irreversible, one that won't slip away. We might meet obstacles and things that temporarily cause us to divert or have to find a creative response to. But the perseverance is irreversible. And this is where we bring the joy. It means that when you first engage with any activity with this motivation of enlightenment for the benefit of others, you do it joyfully. And furthermore, you have a sense of insatiability that will sustain you. So you're not satisfied and likely to stop. So we use that sense of, quite often insatiability is used for things that are not so wholesome. But in this way, it's the never give up. We're not satisfied until we continue to work for sentient beings, until their enlightenment. We yearn for it insatiably. This is a quote from the ornament of Mahayana Sutras. One who has joyous perseverance is not brought down by prosperity, afflictions, discouragement, or petty attainments. And this is helpful because it's saying it's not that we're just likely to get thrown off course by the difficulties and the obstacles of afflictions and discouragement, but we might get thrown off course unless we have this joyous perseverance by prosperity, or even some minor attainments and realizations. So we need this insatiability to continue, to keep doing our work joyfully. And furthermore, because, another quote, through merit the body is blissful, through knowledge the mind is too. Through remaining in cyclic existence for others' welfare, why should compassionate ones be disheartened? So with joyful endeavour, we have the means of body and mind being blissful in engaging in our progress towards enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. Joyfulness comes from practicing without expectation. And then rejoicing in the good things we accomplish. The results will come, but we can't force them. And if we have expectation, that can hinder us. Perhaps you can think of in your own situation where expectations can be problematic. So we set out on a path that does lead to a result. But if we have our own fixed ideas of when and how it will happen, then we're just delaying our progress and risking discouragement. This is a quote from Lama Yeshe that I find very helpful. Some Western people are too emotional about bodhicitta. You think, all these suffering people, I must get them to enlightenment. Well, if it's done in a heavy way, that's wrong. With bodhicitta, you're not upset. You're not too emotional. You're easygoing. And there's much wisdom. You open your heart to all living beings and live that way as much as you can. When you open up hugely to others, your consciousness expands, becomes universal. So we set ourselves in the direction of the attainment of enlightenment, but we don't have a sense of expectation at any given time. And we set ourselves a task, and we complete it, and we take the next task. And we do it joyfully. Just as the text says, an elephant that is scorched by the midday sun will plunge into a lotus pond. And that's how we joyfully carry on, taking that plunge over and over. And the fourth power is rest. So when we know that our strength is declining, we pause, we take rest. We practice in a measured way, at a pace we can sustain. It's not boom and bust. It's recognizing our limitations. We can even take joyful rest. It's this easygoing, relaxed mind that Lama Yeshe was talking about. When we force and push too hard, actually we become our own worst enemy at times, because we can't sustain it, and we're not always good to those around us. So love and compassion that leads to bodhicitta needs to be this relaxed, open mind, open heart. So just connect again with these two powers, of approaching tasks with joyfulness, and recognizing that one needs to pace oneself. Work with moderation, with what's possible.
Okay, so going back to the text, verse 63 and 64 deal with this power of joy. Just like those who yearn for the fruits of play, bodhisattvas are attracted to whatever task they do. So this is a reference to children playing, and they don't get tired when they're really absorbed in their play. And they're just fueled by the joy of play, actually. And when it comes to the power of joy, the word effort, it seems to me, somewhat lessens its importance, because joy actually makes the task somewhat effortless. And I think that's what's meant. They never have enough. It only brings them joy. And then, although people work in order to be happy, it's uncertain whether or not they'll find it. But how can those whose work itself is joy find happiness unless they do it? So this is actually really quite a complex verse, but it all hinges on the way that we think the word work means something hard, hard work. So if any of you have had or have the good fortune to have a job that you really enjoy, you will know the power of joy, that your work itself is joy. And so your work is actually play, in the way that children play for pleasure. So I know we have an artist here, and I know that artists sometimes experience this. I think it's very profound, actually, these two verses, although in a way it's very light and, joyous, actually. So like those who yearn for the fruits of play, Bodhisattvas are attracted to whatever task they may do. So Bodhisattvas don't discriminate whether something is going to be hard work or not, because as long as it's Bodhisattva practice, in other words, practice in which they are benefiting others, or indeed in meditation, progressing on the path to enlightenment, because part of the Bodhisattva path, of course, is to generate realizations. And that's an important point also. Realizations are joy. When we were creating the retreat center called Land of Joy, which is quite interesting that it has that name, I did a little interview with Geshe Tashi, who was teaching in London at that time. And I asked him, what does the name Lands of Joy mean for you? And he said something like, I think it might mean the joy of the realizations that people will have there. And that's quite encouraging in terms of Dharma, because Dharma isn't all about hard work in the sense of effort. It's also got this kind of plateau aspect, which is, it usually comes after effort. So there's effort, and then there's this kind of gliding in a state of pure joy, which is the realization phase. It's literally called the period of forbearance or uninterrupted path, which is where you're actually removing the obscuration. And then there's what's called the liberated path, which is where you've removed it and you're now free. And at that stage, there's definitely a joy. one thing that helps me to understand these things is to think about some of the lamas. His Holiness Dalai Lama is a great example of somebody who is evidently joyful almost all the time, or mostly when I see him anyway. Or Lama Yeshe was a very good example of this, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche is too. Geshe Wangchen certainly was. You can feel the joy in such people, which is the result of fruit of their practice. And it's also something that is evident, whatever they do, whatever kind of issues they encounter, even difficult challenges. And I was also thinking of Kadrala, who is one of my teachers. And when we were in the process of developing the project to create the Land of Joy, the retreat center, I had an interview with her, and I asked her the question, can you, because she's clairvoyant, she's known to be clairvoyant, so I asked her the question, can you advise on what obstacles there are to our project and what we need to do to overcome them? And she just immediately looked me in the eyes and said, there are no obstacles. And I nearly fell over because I assumed that everything you do has obstacles. In fact, there are even some teachings that if you're doing something positive, there are going to be obstacles. And she's just said there are no obstacles. Just like that, I mean, it's like she didn't stop to think. She has that kind of mind. So in a way, it's not surprising that she didn't stop to think. But what was really interesting was that it proved to be kind of true. It didn't mean we didn't have to do anything, but as I let go of the anxiety of obstacles, and the team kind of developed this kind of momentum, it became more that the work was joy. And of course, that helped to create a center whose name is Land of Joy. And then I also had an anxiety that it won't live up to its name. And therefore, it'll be just sort of wearing the mask of a name, because usually in Dharma centers, quite a lot of people get miserable because they fall out and things. And it's not that it's all been completely easy, but actually people who go to do retreats there almost invariably do come away saying that it was really joyful. So joy becomes the work, and the effort is not hard. It becomes less and less. And again, to quote Kadrala, in her recent prayer called The Creative Play of Wisdom, which is an invocation of Tara, she talks about the point where you have meditation on emptiness. And she says, while abiding in this state of evenness, everything wished for arises without effort. Everything wished for arises without effort. So I just wanted to say that because that's where we're heading with this text. We're in the section about where it has not diminished, may it grow and flourish. Well, in chapter 9, we're going to get to the emptiness section. And the whole point about emptiness is that when you abide in the evenness of meditating on emptiness, then everything is joy and there's no effort. So joyous effort isn't slogging necessarily. Of course it is at times, and we need to work more and more at the practice in order to eliminate those obstacles and those obscurations. And along the way, yes, we do need the power of rest. And if we look at verse 67, it says, when my strength declines, I should leave whatever I am doing in order to be able to continue with it later. Okay, so in terms of the question that you asked earlier, Lauren, I think this is the advice. You should leave whatever I'm doing in order to be able to continue with it later. So even when you're having what you called a bad day, you go into it with the knowledge that a good day will come. And so you're using this as an example of the power of rest. And we all need to do that. You don't have to have an illness in order for this to be necessary. You know, Lama Zopa Rinpoche is famous for staying awake almost 24 hours a day. And so he works so hard. But the last time that I saw him and he gave me some advice, it was just one line, and he said it twice, because the first time he said it, I couldn't believe that he would say that. And he said, don't work too hard. I thought, Lama Zopa, how can you advise anybody not to work too hard? But the next day I had a sort of collapse from exhaustion. And it is very, very good advice, because I do tend to push myself a bit too hard. And this power of rest is your way of making sure that you don't have a collapse. So it might be good, if you're prone to collapse, to actually start to rest before the collapse comes. So to know that it's on its way, and then just ease off. And that's something you need to do in meditation as well. When you're doing practices, intense practices of meditation, sometimes you just have to let go, space out, then dive back into the analysis or whatever you're doing. So that's the power of rest. Having done something well, I should put it aside with the wish to accomplish what will follow. So that's the little pause that you have between projects. So when you complete something, give yourself a break. You know, it's not like you have to suddenly fill that vacuum. What is that vacuum? It's part of reality. Everything is empty. So stop grasping it. I've got to fill this space. I've got to fill this space. I've got to fill this space. You don't have to fill this space. In fact, you need to alternate doing and being. And the doing is when you're making an effort, unless you're really completely powered by joy, in which case it's effortless. But the being is where you just pause and you don't do anything. It's one of those don't just do something, sit there moments. That Zen t-shirt, don't just do something, sit there. Well, sometimes it's really healthy to just sit there or lie there or whatever it is, wander there, go into nature and just interact without any thought of what you're trying to achieve. Very, very good. Okay, and then finally, the very final verse of this chapter is very beautiful, in my opinion. Just as the wind, blowing back and forth, controls the movement of a piece of cotton, and for this I would personally read cotton wool, but it could just be a little piece of cotton, it doesn't matter. So shall I be controlled by joy, and in this way accomplish everything. I'll just read it again because it's kind of beyond commentary, this verse. Just as the wind, blowing back and forth, controls the movement of a piece of cotton, so shall I be controlled by joy, and in this way accomplish everything. So in this case, joy is being likened to the wind. I think at the beginning of the chapter, there was a reference to wind, wasn't there? Just as there is no movement without wind, so merit does not incur without enthusiasm. So basically, that's the first verse, by the way. This is the last verse. So it comes back to the wind. So wind is energy. And energy needn't be effort in the conventional sense that it's hard work. Energy can be something which just moves you almost spontaneously because of the power of virtue, because it's so positive. And that's really what this wind is. It blows back and forth. I think that's also interesting. It's like being reborn, living, dying, being reborn, living, dying. That's our future. You know, if we're on the Bodhisattva path, that is our future. even when we become fully enlightened, we will manifest like Buddha Shakyamuni, and then we will show parinirvana like Buddha Shakyamuni, and then we'll manifest in another place, and so on. But as bodhisattvas, we have to just keep coming back. So we need to let go of the kind of angst and grind associated with old age and death, for example, even sickness. You know, there is a way of being sick that isn't necessarily so dreadful. But of course, that demands mental composure. So it's not that we don't have to practice. We need bodhicitta and we need the wisdom understanding emptiness. And when we bring these two together, then we will be able to be like this piece of cotton, controlled by joy. Isn't that amazing? Controlled by joy? It means you just surrender and let joy figure out where you go and what you do and blow you backwards and forwards, because it's going to take you somewhere positive. And in this way, accomplish everything. What is everything? Well, there's only one everything that you need to accomplish, and that's to bring all sentient beings to enlightenment. So by being controlled by joy, you'll be able to do even that. So this is so positive, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so breakout groups, and the topic is similar to last time, but this time it's these two further joy powers. My experience of the powers of joy and rest, and you just need to share something with your partner about that. And I'll just